So let's examine this claim that I'm going to put right here for a few seconds. Is Christ the end of the law? A lot of people point to Romans chapter 10, verse 4. As you can see beside me, it says, "For Christ is the end of the law, for righteousness to everyone that believeth." And they use that to say that the Ten Commandments were abolished. However, as we're about to discover, the Ten Commandments and the ceremonial law were two different laws. The Ten Commandments are eternal, the ceremonial law was abolished. And if we study the context of Romans 10 right here, you see that Paul was speaking of Israel. Why were they blinded? Because they refused to let go of the ceremonial law. Acts 15, they refused to let go of the law of Moses, we call it. See, Colossians 2 says, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, nailing it to his cross. What was it that was against us? Ephesians 2 says the same thing. Deuteronomy 31 talks about how the book of the law, the book of Moses, was put in the side of the ark, and it specifically calls it, notice, a witness against you. So that witness against us was the law of Moses that was blotted out, not the Ten Commandments. But let's go further. In Hebrews 9, it says the same thing. It says that these ordinances were imposed until the time of Reformation. What happened that these things no longer apply? 9 says that when Jesus would die first, he would cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. When Jesus died on the cross, all the feast days, all of that was swept away. Now let's talk about some scriptures that show that the Ten Commandments are still in fact binding. Matthew 24:20, Jesus is prophesying both the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened around 40 years after his crucifixion and resurrection, and the end of the world, which that part's still yet to come. But he says, pray that your flight be not on the winter, nor on the Sabbath. Why would he say that if by his death he was going to abolish the Sabbath? Now in Mark 2, he says he's the Lord of the Sabbath, and he also says the Sabbath is made for man. All mankind, not just one people group. People often point to this verse and say that Sunday is the new Sabbath, but if we compare this with what we just read, John was in the Spirit on the Sabbath, not on Sunday. Now notice this part, Revelation 14:6 calls verses 7 through 12 the everlasting gospel, and one of the things it does, notice how it quotes here in the green, worship him that made heaven, earth, and everything else. It's quoting it directly from the Sabbath commandment. The Sabbath, the true seventh-day Sabbath, is a part of the everlasting gospel. Why? Because notice here in Ezekiel 20, it says that the Sabbath is the sign that God sanctifies us. In Matthew 1:21, the Bible says that Jesus is named Jesus because he will save his people from their sins, not in them. And the Sabbath, the true seventh-day Sabbath, is the sign of that. Now, I highly recommend this book that a good pastor, a friend of mine, just published. Search his name on Amazon, it'll come right up. And notice this chart he put in his book. Everything that describes God's law describes God. You cannot abolish the Ten Commandments any more than you can abolish God himself, because they are his character, and he never changes.